Although there are lacking protocols, there are a couple papers that I want to mention here that might help you lift fear and give you a little more guidance around strength training during pregnancy. So one paper studied the benefits and risks of heavy weightlifting during pregnancy. The paper surveyed 679 women who engaged in heavy resistance training during pregnancy. And they defined heavy resistance training as 80% of 1 rep maximum, which for reference, this is pretty heavy, anywhere from 6 to 12 reps per set. The participants used a variety of lifting methods. About half of the participants engaged in CrossFit, while about the other half identified with just kind of weightlifting in general. Most of the women in the studies were performing Olympic lifts such as clean and jerks and snatches. They also performed supine movements, which means laying flat on your back like a bench press. They performed squats, deadlifts, cleans, things like that. Women from this study who maintained pre-pregnancy training levels until delivery reported significantly fewer complications than those who reduced training before their delivery. So the women that continued to strength train and lift relatively heavy weights had better outcomes than the women who backed off during their pregnancy. In other words, these women continued to train similarly to how they trained pre-pregnancy and had better outcomes. This group did show higher risk of urinary incontinence postpartum. I thought this was interesting and something I could note. So 57% of participants experienced postpartum urinary incontinence, which is higher than the general population rates at 32%. This could possibly be due to exercising too soon postpartum rather than the weightlifting during pregnancy itself. So they measured these women postpartum, not during pregnancy, and found that their rates of urinary incontinence were higher. This, again, could be because they weren't easing in. Gradual progression during postpartum is crucial for avoiding pelvic floor symptoms and urinary incontinence, so it could have been that they were doing too much too soon. It could also be due to ineffective lifting techniques causing improper pelvic floor pressure management while lifting. It could also be due to really ignoring signs and symptoms, pushing through things like heaviness, pain, leaking while lifting instead of modifying or seeking help from a pelvic floor physical therapist. So in other words, it may not be weightlifting itself causing urinary incontinence, and I don't want you all to be afraid of that. But rather, urinary incontinence may be caused by returning to exercise too soon or too intensely, improper breathing, which we'll talk about in a moment, or lacking self-regulation and modifications. So these women who lifted heavy really had good outcomes. Does this mean that you need to do CrossFit while pregnant? If you want to, that's an option, but many women don't have an interest in training like that, myself included. But there are other ways to build muscle and strength that feel more appropriate. More on that in a moment. Another study that I want to reference before we get into if you can build muscle and how to build muscle during pregnancy is a study from 2024. And this supports the idea that heavy lifting is both safe and beneficial during pregnancy, claiming that weightlifting with loads up to 70% of your 1 rep max, so that's about 10 to 15 reps taken close to failure or to failure, show no adverse effects on maternal or fetal outcomes. So where does all of this information leave us? From what we can see, lifting relatively heavy weights appears to be safe and beneficial during pregnancy.